I'm Liam Milan, and in this video we're going to explore Ableton Live's Drum Synths. So Ableton has a selection of devices which can synthesize drum sounds from nothing. So rather than being sample based and manipulating samples to make your drums, these ones will start from synthesis onwards. So let's start by taking a look at the different drum synths. I'm going to load in an empty drum rack to house all these instruments. You can load one in on a MIDI track itself, but the workflow doesn't really lend itself to making a whole drum beat. So I've got an empty drum rack and I'm just going to grab the kick drum synth and load that in to the first drum pad there. So I've already got a basic pattern programmed in. So we've got some tuning options here, and you have a musical reference point at the top. So if you know what key you're going to work in, it could be useful to tune the drum to that. Have a pitch envelope control, a decay amount, and then we have different aspects of drive and overtones, so harmonics that go into the sound. We have an attack stage in terms of smoothing the attack, and then we also have a click that we can add to emphasize the attack too. So I'm just going to leave the kick pattern running and just explore this until I feel that I've got the right tonality I want to start off my drum kit design. Okay, that sounds quite nice. So my next sound, I'm going to load in a snare, just a classic next move, which I believe is there. So a very 909 sounding, sort of white noisy snare here. We can change the color, and the tone of this using these two controls. Tuning is available. And we have a filter as well, which will change the timbre of the sound. So let's move on to the first kind of percussive element, our cymbals, our hi-hat. Quite a different tone if we move between white and pink. Again, very similar to some classic drum machines and how they've worked with synthesis-based sounds. Now, an interesting thing to do here when you've already established a first concept for what your, let's say, a tight hi-hat will sound like, is to think of a workflow of how we're going to do this. So I could use automation when the hi-hats play and have that change the properties of the hi-hat over time and make it dynamic that way. But a simpler way to, one, deal with different versions of the same sound, so you've got some places to go, and also deal with handling the data, is to just copy it across and modify a copy of it. By doing that, it also makes it way easier for me with the actual different lanes here to be able to program with just notes rather than dealing with automation and doing more complex data management as I work. So my hi-hat is here. I'm just going to copy that across so the copy of it plays straight after. Okay, so I've got another part in my existing MIDI pattern that I'm going to bring in here. Now, we've got a clap as well. So actually, before I do that other part, I'm going to try and emphasize my snare that I've got by adding a clap to it. So if I click and drag the clap to my snare cell, if I just let go of it, it overwrites the existing one. But if I hold command when I do it, it will actually group it alongside the snare. So now they're accompanying each other. I may need to offset the volume a little bit just because two sounds are going to be louder than one. So let's just try and balance those together. So there's some interesting aspects of how you can change the tightness and the duration of the clap sounds, tuning and decay, which I've just been playing with. We can also change the stereo aspect with the spread control. So that sounds nice, it's just potentially a little bit overpowering, so just pull the snare up and bring in the clap in underneath it. Okay, so let's go back to that unused MIDI pattern. So the cymbal section can be used for some pretty big sounds. But if we tighten it up, it becomes like an open hi-hat sound as well. If you want a shared tonality with a crash later, hold Alt and just drag that up to the top and then create an elongated version of that, maybe with a slightly different pitch and tone. And again, I'm just trying to be efficient with how I'm using these drum synths as I put them together. So my pattern, if I do duplicate, can be 4 bars, and at the beginning of the 4 bars we'll have that long cymbal. So the volume of the cymbal is quite high. I don't necessarily want it to be quite as dramatic as that, so let's try that. And again, if I want to extend the established sound that I'm creating, like the sonic identity of my drum kit, I could copy across these and make other instances again and program in different parts that they play on. So we've covered the clap, the cymbal, kick and snare. Let's have a look at adding some percussive tom parts. So I'm just going to grab tom and pop that up to A1 and just start putting in some parts for this. Okay, now it's very loud, so I'm going to just completely pull it out of the mix first. And again, Alt and drag. Let's create another pitched version of that. And grab that, just offset it to the original. So now I've got my toms playing the same pattern, but they're staggered from each other. Could be worth just extending the drum rack here, finding my toms and just slightly panning the earlier one to the left and the later one to the right. Great, so it's really starting to get a sense of a nice electro style beat. We have a couple of other options here. The Clang is like a cowbell orientated sound, so we'll try and work that in a minute. We also have the FM synthesis based instrument here. So if I sequence in something that's going to be fairly regular, let's go for an offbeat through this. We haven't got a sense of offbeat yet. As you can hear, it's loud, so I'm just going to turn off the preview there, just sequence that in. Let's just pull that volume down and pull the decay right in. Now, the nature of any of these sounds might be that decay works to be long, but in the context of this, I want to create a lot of layers of rhythm here, so I don't have much space for long decays. So that's why I'm personally immediately bringing this back. If you want to go for a much more sparse beat or slowing down the tempo and being sparse, you have way more room for letting these decays just ring out and fill up the space in between the rhythmic events. So not at the foreground of the mix, just another detail in there to rhythm. And then finally, let me show you the clang, which can be our cowbell even reference point. So it's got two tones to it, the way that it works. Typically when you synthesize a cowbell, it only has a couple of pitches to it. It's usually like a triangle wave that you then modify the harmonics of, so they're not quite as harmonious. So it's similar in this respect. We've got two tones on this one. So let's have a quick look at sequencing something for this. Again, I'm gonna, for efficiency reasons, gonna rob from my FM pattern and put it, let's try on the beat and see what that sounds like, because it's gonna really emphasize a downbeat doing that. So it's a volume of the two different tones here. We have a filter, which helps me put it more into the high frequencies and removes so much of the weight from the bottom. And we also have a noise aspect. Again, like the kick drum, we had the attack button, or the click button, sorry, that we could enable to add a click noise at the beginning and really emphasize the sense of attack. We have the clav option here, which can do the same. And the duration of the clav as well can be in a loop mode, so it kind of rings out. So that's what this adjustment is doing, is whether it's just a singular version of the sound or whether it's sort of a merge of many repeats that creates a bit more of a decay to it. Okay, so that's all the synthesize based drum synth options here. There is a sampler option, which is, it's not really in the nature of what we're doing here, but it is part of the package. And this one has like a shaping option to be able to take samples. You drag and drop them into there, and you can then use the shaper to give it more of a vintage, retro, lower fidelity digital digitized sound. And then you have a loop function in terms of what it can do to the samples, similar to what we just talked about with the clav. And then you can just do the basic functions of decay, start, and length of the sample as well. So let's just stay in drum synthesis mode for now. So this is just raw drum synthesis. We haven't added anything to it. Of course, you can drag and drop sounds per instance on the drum pads to try and, you know, take them further in the direction and customize them yourselves. The last thing I wanted to cover was to just mute the drum synth and play an acoustic kit instead. Now that we know what those drum synths do, let's put them in a different context. That was a very electro purist drum synth scenario before, where it was kind of like an electro beat. This instance, I'm going for a very acoustic beat, and I want to be able to enforce certain aspects of the beat using drum synthesis. It's very nice acoustically, it's deep, it's big, but it hasn't got the power that you'd need for a more electronic orientated genre, where you may still use the backdrop sound of a drum kit like this, but it doesn't have the fundamental low weight that you'd need to really carry the rhythm. So what I have here is a kick drum. Let me just solo that out. And if you just have a sample, it's a kit, whether it's this one or another one, and the sample is just straight on the drum pad and it's on its own, it's not accompanied with any groupings or additional processing, you can use the same method we used before, where you might drag samples over each other using the command function. So I'm going to go to the drum synths again, grab myself a kick. There's two ways we could do this. We can drag a kick over to the existing acoustic kick, hold command and just pop that on alongside. Now we have one MIDI note that triggers that pad, going to trigger the original, this session drums, kick drum sample alongside my synthetic kick. One thing we can do here is tune the synthetic layer to be in keeping with the acoustic layer. We can do that either by ear, You can do it based on knowing what musical key it is, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, using the readout there that tells you that. And another option is, if we just mute that kick for a minute, is on the sample side of things, just to load in something that lets you see where the frequencies are in the sound. I'm actually going to put this EQ8 right at the end of the drum rack. Because I've soloed the kick out by itself, I don't need to drag it onto just the drum pad. And if I watch what's going on here, I'm going to look for the lowest predominant frequency that's on the acoustic layer and use that as my guide of where I should tune the synthetic layer, so they're unified in terms of where they're trying to reach you in their physical power. So I'm seeing it's around about here that it's starting the impact, and then there's a tail, which is your usual sub decay as it lowers down in volume as the sound decays. So I'm going to use the EQ here to just try and emphasize it and hear it more obviously, and then I can use the readout of the position of that EQ to then put the data into the synthesis layer. So it sounds like around about 50 Hertz. I'll just turn that EQ band off because it's purely there as an analytical tool. And then let's punch in 50 Hertz to this, combine it with the original. And we've really made that lowest fundamental sing. So doing the whole kit this way is beyond the scope of what we can fit into this video time, but we could do the similar thing with the snare drum that plays in this beat. Same process, figure out where the fundamental of the snare is, and then add in maybe a clap or add in the drum synth snare, and then tune that to enforce what's going on the acoustic side with a synthetic layer that can sit at the front of your mix. In this video, we've had a look at Ableton Live's drum synth devices, how we can use them in a drum rack and create our own electronic sounding drum kits, and then how we can also use existing drum sounds and samples and enforce certain aspects by tuning, analyzing, and adding additional drum synth layers.